What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Tuesday, April 17th, 2018, getting into the week here. A lot of stuff going on. Apparently, Trump is meeting with Japan's Prime Minister Abe down at his Florida White House, and they're saying positive things about North Korea. We'll have more about that a little bit later. Anyway, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions, of which I'm sure you probably have a lot of today. And so let's just get right into the news, because there is a lot going on. Now, there's been some confusion over an attack that supposedly happened last night, where Israeli planes attacked an airbase in eastern Homs, and then somebody said it was a false alarm. Then there was this huge explosion in the Israeli-occupied part of the Golan, which is still unexplained at this point. But apparently the Syrian military is saying that, yes, indeed, the Israeli Air Force fired several missiles toward the Shayrat Air Base and its surrounding area in the Homs Governorate. And according to the statement, the Syrian Air Defense managed to intercept several of the missiles, but there was no mention as to whether or not the Israelis scored any actual hits or not. This is the second time in 7 days that Israel has targeted the eastern countryside of the Homs Governorate. So Israel's just out there just punching away, trying to get something going. And the reason is very obvious. They don't want to surrender the Golan. They're occupying Syria's Golan Heights. They discovered huge amounts of oil and gas under it. They've already drilled wells. They're already making deals to sell it all. They don't want to give that money back. That's why Netanyahu was so upset when Donald Trump just a couple of weeks ago was talking about pulling out of Syria. Because once the U.S. is out of Syria, Syria is going to want to take that Golan Heights back. They're going to need that oil and gas revenue to rebuild their country after 7 years of war. Now, the chemical weapons inspectors from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons have finally reached the alleged Syria chemical attack site in Douma. Last night, there were headlines all over, oh, the Russians and Syrians are preventing them from getting there. They must be guilty. Pardon me. And basically, there was a delay out of concern because of the attack last night that the U.S. could still launch a cruise missile into Douma to try and erase the evidence, or just make it impossible to find anything one way or the other. But they're on site right now. They're continuing, they're commencing their work, and so far, batting zero. But I feel obliged to warn the OPCW about any Americans who might be on their team, owing to this ugly incident that happened all the way back when the IAEA was asked to verify that Iraq was making weapons-grade uranium. Of course, the IAEA found nothing whatsoever. And then all of a sudden, they found some highly enriched uranium, just one tiny particle. And it was suspected that the Americans on the team had used a reference sample that they'd brought to basically plant the fake evidence. And when the IAEA asked for the Americans' reference sample to do an isotopic comparison with what had been found, the Americans simply destroyed the sample before it could be analyzed. Now, the U.S. government loves to play dirty. They're not following international law. They're not following the Constitution. They're just doing what they want to do. And whatever dirty trick they can pull to get out of this mess they've created for themselves with this lie, they're going to do it. And apparently, Russian soldiers have found yet another chemical weapons storage facility in a rebel base in the Syrian city of Douma. And the substances they found are thiodylhydrocol, diethanolamine, which are needed for the production of sulfur and nitrogen iperite. A chlorine balloon was found in the warehouse, the same as the one used by terrorists for directing a high-profile fake story. And Star TV said the warehouse was built in the basement of the residential building, and according to the experts of the Radiation, Chemical, and Biological Protection Units of Alexander Rodnov, the laboratory was used by terrorist organizations controlled by this city. So everywhere they go, they're finding chemical weapons materials, but always in the hands of the U.S.-backed rebels. Now, Robert Fisk is a well-respected journalist. He's been around for a lot of years, and he's sort of been shoved a little bit out of the mainstream because he made a name for himself back during the Iraq War by challenging the official story and saying it doesn't make sense. And he's got a reputation for just going on out on his own, putting his own safety on the line to get the story, and that's what he's done. He got himself into Syria, and he got into Duma, and basically says the video of the kids who are being hosed down and given this asthma medication, those kids had inhaled a huge amount of dust because apparently when the air raid sirens go off, everybody ducks down into these basements and tunnels to shelter from the attack, and the basements and tunnels are filled with all kinds of trash and dust, and there just happened to be a high wind at the time that threw all this dust into the air and made these kids sick. And the White Helmets grabbed this video and said chemical weapons attack, and we were off to bombing Syria again with these $2 million a pop cruise missiles. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And we're talking about Syria. We're talking about the OPCW is now on the ground at Duma, trying to find any evidence that chemical weapons were in fact used. Meanwhile, the U.S., never one to admit to having done wrong, is now back to their story claiming Russia has hacked the Syrian attack evidence. And that's the new Russian line, that everywhere that Assad has used chemical weapons, Syria and Russia clean it up real quick. And that even worse, Russia is planting the chemical weapons evidence on the rebels. Now, in an act of what is obvious desperation, the White House is now offering a cash reward of $10,000 to anybody who was a witness of a chemical attack in Duma. And the reward is now $5,000 in other cities. And you're going to get people who are going to come forward and just lie through their teeth because they need that money. That's a lot of money to a person in Syria. Actually, it's a lot of money to me. Not enough to make me lie, but it's a lot of money. Somebody posted on Twitter this comment about, my wife is using chlorine bleach on my undies. Does that qualify for the reward? Remember when the U.S. was in Iraq and they were grabbing totally innocent Iraqis, throwing them in Abu Ghraib and torturing them, some of them to death, to find the weapons of mass destruction which turned out not to exist? There was a reward program there. And that's how they tagged these people. They offered this huge reward for information on anybody who might know about the WMDs. And Iraqis used the opportunity to get a little bit of money, get rid of a business rival or a romantic rival. You know, offering this reward, they're going to get a bunch of liars coming out of the woodwork. And of course, the corporate media will say, see, we have a witness. Now, here's something you need to keep in mind. The BBC is reporting that experts over in Salisbury are saying it will take months to remove all traces of whatever nerve agent was used on the Skripals from Salisbury. And yet we're supposed to believe the Russians were able to clean up all traces of the chemical weapon attack in Duma in a matter of a couple of days. That's how ridiculous the lies are getting. For propaganda to work, it must be believable. It must be able to survive at least a cursory analysis by the people listening to it. And if it can't do that, it's a failure as propaganda. All right, let's take a phone call here from Mike in Chicago. Mike, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Yeah, staying on topic. I just heard today that Assad is I would say he's a nationalist, and he's a good person. He actually likes he likes, I don't know the word, like Christians. You know, he's not just anti-Christian at all. He wouldn't do something like this to his people also. That way I understand this. And again, this is all hanky-panky. I guess Trump doesn't have a choice, really, but I would imagine that Israel has something to do with it, and we shouldn't be getting involved with all of this garbage. We have so many problems, like we talk about every day. But I would. My main point is, I just want to say that if you're sympathetic to Christians, good people, just look. There's good Muslim, there's good Christian, there's good Jews. And how can everybody hate the Jews if they're only a very small portion of the whole world? I don't get that either. That doesn't sound feasible.
Well, it's just part of Israel's propaganda. Everybody hates the Jews, and that's absolutely ridiculous. The Jews inevitably do cause a lot of friction in the communities they move into because they want to live apart. They don't want to assimilate or integrate. But most Jews are, they're just like everybody else. They want to take care of their families. They want to take care of their business. We're talking about the actions of a very few people at the top of the government of Israel. And they scream anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism. No, it isn't anti-Semitism at all. It's anti-dictatorship, it's anti-war crime, but that's not it. I mean, my first wife was Jewish. My very best friend in Hollywood, Renee Valente, was Jewish, and she was one of the very few people who stayed in contact with me after my blacklisting. And that showed a lot of character and courage on her part, I have to say. I can talk about her now that she's passed away. But while she was still alive, I never dared mention her because I didn't want to bring harm down on her.
Yeah, I want to stay on topic real quick, and I'll let you go. I read an article today on the catastrophe that we're heading into with pensions, unfunded liabilities, and Harvey was the focus of the article. And I guess they actually lost 10% of their population. They are now going into receivership with the state. The state now is garnishing the town's wages. In order to, because these unfunded pension liability, it has to get, it has to get paid, and that the state will come in and, like the IRS, and garnish the town's wages. And then what happens after that? It's kind of like bankruptcy. Then they have to start laying off the fire department, the police, and they have to take pay cuts. And there's no taxpayers around, to pick up any of these pieces. And it's almost like out of the 400 or 500 pensions in Illinois that are on this same path, it seems like, this Harvey is going to be like the poster child, sort of like Detroit went under, you know what I mean? So
yes.
We're keeping an eye on that. I was just, wow, that blew my mind today, and how, the Wall Street doesn't think about any of this. And, these promises are not being funded. They're promising, returns, 30-40% above inflation. I mean, that's just never going to happen. And then, I guess the unions and the government or municipality, they think they're just going to get bailed out by the taxpayer.
Yeah, but when everybody runs out of money, that thinking breaks down. This goes all the way back to George Herbert Walker Bush and the first S&L bailout, where they just tried to set up this model that no matter what fails in our economic system, the taxpayers can cover it. But then they went and they declared war on the taxpayers. They've lowered wages and salaries to basically borderline starvation levels. And when you lower wages and salaries, you also lower your tax revenues. And so it's a dead-end path here. And when everybody runs out of money, everything stops working. I think we're going to see a lot of towns just simply go out of business and just evaporate. They're going to be abandoned towns. We saw that in the 1930s. Entire towns, everybody just moved away because they couldn't have a functioning economy where they were anymore.
Yeah, I would challenge people to type in Google Harvey pension obligations, and maybe pull that article up. It's because they lost 10% of their population. Their promises are way higher than their private sector money creation, capital creation. I don't know, when you see this, and then like you said, everybody leaves, right? Everybody's been leaving Illinois, I understand, too. You don't hear any of this, yeah.
No,
I
you
don't
don't.
shop in Cook County.
We have negative population growth here in Hawaii. We're losing 11 families a day on average.
The only thing I see out here in the parking lot is a couple jackrabbits. That doesn't count.
Well, tax them.
I'll let you go.
Tax them. We need a rabbit tax here.
Oh, yeah. He's looking at me right now. Okay. See you, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Breaking news, Mike. Putin got caught with a sponge and a mop trying to clean down the scenes.
Well, he should have used a Swiffer. That's all I can say.
Now, how stupid... I mean, did anybody believe that? There would be, like, remnants on, like, the ground, on the walls, because it would be outside, obviously, so it's impossible to clean down a scene like that. I mean, that's just laughable. Come on now.
Of course it is. But, the motto of the U.S. government, if at first you don't succeed, lie again.
It's not just the U.S. government, Mike. It's the British government, the French government. This is the new axis of evil, Mike.
Yes.
These are the kings of the world, Mike.
Yep.
They think they're rulers of, and you know who's blocking them, Mike? Russia.
Yes.
That's it. Mike, you remember Oliver Stone did an interview with Putin a while ago, like a documentary on him.
Yes.
Did you see there's a newer one?
No, I didn't, but I can't wait to see it.
Well, Mike, it was done after when he addressed Congress. And Oliver Stone talked about, with the new weapon system. And you know what Oliver Stone says? Putin's getting ready. He's ready, basically. He knows what's coming.
Yeah, so does Xi Jinping. Everybody knows what's coming, and everybody knows who's doing it. And everybody is basically doing what they can to try and defend themselves. That's why North Korea was trying to get nuclear weapons, to basically deter a U.S. attack.
And, Mike, did you see Trump talking about how the missiles hit all their targets? And don't watch those videos of them getting shot out of the air, though. It's like he was pitching for Raytheon of the Tomahawk missile, which he did the same. Remember when he sat down with MBS and he had the picture of all the weapons? The guy's a psychopath.
He's a salesman.
Truly.
He's a salesman. The side benefit of stirring up all these wars in all these countries is the U.S. weapons makers are going around making deals. And unfortunately, of course, Russia is out there selling weapons as well, and apparently Russian weapons are starting to outsell American weapons in certain categories.
I'll tell you one thing, that Buk system really come through, the Buk M2. Wow, man, that was one of the best systems.
Yeah,
that's from the 70s.
That's 30-year-old technology. So much for Trump's tweet about our missiles are coming in fast and smart. Not smart enough.
Well, missile tech from Russia is 20 to 25 years. Remember I told you they had the world's fastest torpedo. It does 200 miles an hour underwater called the Shirval.
Yes.
So, Mike, one more thing real quick. I just want to mention Larry Wilkerson also did an interview, and he says basically what we're doing, we're an empire, obviously. You can tell. And instead, we're using, it's like the democracy thing of world domination. So we go into an area for like oil companies and natural resource type of things, and just basically, if the leader doesn't get out of the way, we'll kill him and the indigenous population. Can you imagine the government telling the people that of the country, saying, just tell us the truth? I bet you there'd be percentage of population of this country, and Britain and France would be okay with that, Mike. Just killing.
I think it would be a very small percentage. I think it would be a very small percentage. Most people are humanitarian at heart. The ones who would be all in favor of, as you say, they're invested in the companies. They're making money from all the bloodshed. Anyway, listen, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with more phone calls after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And that front site deal is really very good. If you go over to whatreallyhappened.com or republicbroadcasting.org, up at the top you'll see a link that goes to the front site Training Academy's own webpage. There's a video there that shows everything that goes on there. If I lived on the mainland, anywhere around that part of the country, I would go for this deal myself. That's how sweet it really, really is. And remember, this deal ends on May 5th. So you really need to act now. All right, back to the phones. Kathleen in Paris, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I was listening to somebody you know, Ryan Dawson.
Oh, yes.
And he was speaking about why our attack on Syria was what he called lame, that they didn't shoot any supersonic, that it was all easily shot down stuff, slow missiles, I guess. Anyway, he said his theory on why we did that was not really an aggressive attack, but to what he called light up the grid and be able to see where their defenses were coming from.
Well, that's a very expensive way to figure out where the defenses are. And, of course, Syria's and Russia's air defense units are mobile. And my guess is they're already being relocated.
Yeah, quite likely.
That's what I would
do. The other
do.
thing about, yeah, right. Yeah, some of them are even on pickups, aren't they? On trucks?
Well, yeah, they have their own trucks. The Book missile is a truck mount launcher. And I don't know what else was being used, but these days all of this stuff, comes with its own transporters. I know that Syria has some heavy caliber machine guns mounted on the back of regular trucks, but that's not as effective an air defense weapon unless you've got aircraft coming in really low for like strafing runs and stuff, which wasn't the case here.
Well, the other thing I wanted to talk about was the attack from all sides on Ryan Dawson. That really he's in a world of hurt from Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and all of it. And so I was wondering if you might like to invite him on.
Ryan comes on here anytime he wants to, and he calls into the show on a regular basis. Ryan and I go back many, many years, more than I can remember. We first got together when Ryan was working with his brother on what happened to the people on the lost colony of Roanoke, and subsequently it's turned out that the Dawson brothers' theories have been borne out as to what actually happened to those people. So yeah, Ryan and I have been in touch a lot of years. He makes good videos, and he's definitely one of the good guys.
Okay, so I will leave a comment for him that he should get in touch with you.
Okay, well, I'll drop him a letter and ask him if he wants to come on the show. As far as being attacked on Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, from my point, I just ignore it all. I mean, I did have that public chat up on my website as an experiment, and 2/3 of everything in there was just screaming attacks on me, so I just shut it down. I just don't care anymore. I got better things to do than worry about that stuff.
Yeah, but that's his income,
I'm surprised that he has not been... No, that's not his sole income. I'm not going to go into details, but that's not his sole income. It's terrible to lose the income from your YouTube videos, but then YouTube has never allowed me to monetize any of my videos, either my political videos or even the music videos I make for Claire, some of which are pretty tame and banal, but we've never been authorized for monetization.
Okay. Well, yeah, after I discovered Ryan Dawson, I saw one time that he filled in for you.
Yes.
And had Larkin Rose on.
Yep.
Interviewing. So my favorite guys, Larkin Rose and Dawson and you, and I was going, wow, This is a great party to be at.
Well, except that I
Okay.
wasn't there for that
Well,
party. All right. Well, Kathleen, thanks an
Because you
awful
weren't
lot.
there.
We're going to let you go.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
That
Bye-bye.
delay in the line is why we talk over each other. So are you done?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, okay. All right. Au revoir. And we will let you go here. We're coming up on another commercial break, so I'm not going to start a new phone call. Meanwhile, as we reported earlier, Putin is reinforcing the Russian presence in Syria, and the 2 warships full of new vehicles are on the way or have probably already arrived by now. So this is getting serious. We're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go back to the phones to a caller who identifies himself only as the old man. Aloha, old man. And I question that unless you've got a few years on me. What's on your mind today?
Actually, you've got a couple of years on me.
Well, then you should have identified yourself as the kid.
Old.
You're the kid now.
Anyhow, I want to mention, talk to you about computer chip technology. Back in 1994, the NSA announced that they wanted to put a computer chip in every phone, fax, and computer that would allow them instant access irregardless of the software. And it was called the Clipper chip.
Yes, I remember that.
And the computer industry, fought it. They said, we don't want this in our computers. And the NSA said, okay, we won't do it. Well, about 6 months later, they started to do it anyway. And the original Clipper chip was only 13-bit encryption. And on some of the cell phones, you could bypass it and it would work, but others you couldn't.
Well, actually,
So,
can I just interrupt here for a second, because it was found on the cell phone chips, the high order bits were always set to 0, which made a brute force attack on that phone that much quicker and faster and easier to do. So consumers who were buying those phones were being told that it was actually 16, not 13. 16-bit encryption, but it was really only 8-bit encryption.
Well, I was told by let's just say I know somebody in the NSA, met somebody in the NSA,
Okay.
the very department that developed it, and he mentioned 13-bit. So anyhow, the problem is what they went on to do is this computer chip is now in a lot of the military equipment that they're selling around the world, and that's from the United States and from Israel, and that includes the friendly countries. So when, say, for example, a European country buys the FA-18 jet and they upgrade it, they find out that this upgrade includes this chip, so that during normal practice, the jet will work fine. But during a war, if the U.S. or Israel doesn't want that plane to fly, well, it won't fly, or it can actually crash while it's flying, and the weapons won't work. And this is one of the reasons why many of the countries in Europe are hesitant to get involved in any type of intervention anywhere. And they're looking to upgrade their electronics themselves on some of the equipment.
Yes.
And so I haven't heard anybody else really talk about it.
Well,
very
I
much.
haven't
And,
heard.
you know,
I haven't heard about it being in weapons or anything like that. I know about the.
It is in the weapon.
Well, let me make a point here. First of all, I want to back
Also in
on
the
up. I want to back on up here a little bit. The reason Clipper chip failed was that supposedly the key for your encryption would be split in two and entrusted to two separate escrow agencies. And what the NSA wasn't mentioning was that you only needed one of the keys to derive the other one mathematically. Then it came on out that the encryption key was actually embedded in the encrypted message itself, which made reading it very, very easy. You didn't have to go get the key escrow. It was all just a blind to try and convince the American people to trust this government-sanctioned encryption, which you should never do. And that's why I wrote that article, Rivero Challenges the NSA. If you need to keep secrets from the government, you got to write your own encryption. Now, the idea of playing dirty with our allies goes all the way back to Bletchley Park and cracking the Enigma code. Because after World War II was over, Great Britain and the United States made presents of captured German Enigma machines to our allies, our friendly governments, without mentioning the fact that they could read the messages sent on that device. So the idea that there might be something embedded in America's exported weapons is not beyond the realm of possibility. The only thing that might limit it is whether or not they could get a signal to the aircraft, which is obviously going to be quite far away from the nearest Wi-Fi point, and with successful jamming, might not work at all. And that would be the real key. Find out what frequency that chip is responding to, and just install a jammer on every weapon that you think has one of these chips, and they will be immune.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned the equivalent of the Clipper chip. In other words,
yeah,
it's, the similar concept. Not that it was the Clipper chip itself. It's in the military equipment. About a year and a half ago, I didn't see the article myself, but I talked to someone who is fluent, more fluent in auf Deutsch than I am, and they talked about how the Swiss government went public with this, and they are at this time looking to upgrade much of their electronic equipment themselves.
That would be the smart thing to do. I'm almost wondering if maybe that's what Russia twigged onto when they paralyzed the Donald Cook, that they figured out these chips are there, and they figured out the frequency to activate them, because they just shut that ship down up there in the Black Sea.
When I heard you talk about that on your show, I said to myself, you know what, either they figured it out or Israel is playing both sides, which they sometimes do.
Yes.
And the Russians acquired that technology. And as soon as they upgrade those new ships, that Russia will right away have a new way to break into it again. Figured it out by then. It's amazing. I remember when you talked about that, and you said that they had to tow the ship back to the United States.
They didn't tow it back to the United States. They towed it back to port in the Black Sea.
Talking about the one in the Black Sea?
Yeah.
One from the Black Sea, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you mentioned that they had to tow it back, yeah.
They had to tow it back to the port in the Black Sea.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood you. But, when people talk about software, this and that, it's really the chip. And when I looked at the website for Electronic Frontier Foundation and Electronic Privacy Information Center a few years ago, I saw, articles that said, oh, well, they were going to do it, but they decided not to, and this and that. So, I think those two websites, are good in general, but in certain areas, I don't know, I get a sense it might be a little bit of controlled disinformation on some of the information.
Let's look at it from a practical point of view. First of all, if the U.S. is putting these chips in weapons that we sell to our friends, the expectation is we're not going to be at war with our friends, and we're not going to have to knock their aircraft out of the sky, with a computer signal. But at the same time, you're making those exported weapons more vulnerable to electronic countermeasures by other countries. And so I could see why there might be people saying this really isn't such a good idea after all.
Well, let's just say I know somebody, within military intelligence, and they had no idea of it. And they looked into it, and they said that I was accurate. And they were not told. They weren't told about this. They were shocked. So, I don't think the U.S. is telling all their friends who they're selling this equipment to, what they've really done in the upgrade.
Of course they wouldn't tell them. Countries like Great Britain or France or Germany, if they found out that there was a U.S.-controlled kill switch in the weapons being offered for sale, they wouldn't buy them. They absolutely would not buy them.
I think the smart thing for Europe, at least, is to develop their own technology and not rely on the U.S. and Israeli weapons technology. Because then it's
kind of foolish to call it Israeli weapons technology, because Israel just takes the weapons the U.S. develops and gives to them then they reverse engineer it and they manufacture their own variation for sale.
Yeah. So U.S. and Israel. Anyhow, I just wanted to mention that to you, and it seems to me that I would like to hear more discussion about this, because everybody talks about software, and I don't hear enough talking about the hardware aspect.
Well, again, I can imagine a lot of this stuff is in fact classified. Again, the more I think about it, the more I think it's a very foolish thing to do to your allies. And obviously, there's no way to get that chip into the weapons being developed by our potential enemies, such as Russia and China. But in a changing world where our friends can become our enemy overnight, who knows?
Yeah, look at Turkey. Turkey is a NATO ally, and yet they're moving over to Russia.
Yep.
So some of this stuff is fluid. And even Hungary and a few other countries are starting to question the U.S. So,
well, I question the U.S. all the time. Anyway, listen, thank you for the phone call. Thank you for the technical information. I'm going to have to think about this a little bit. The primary weakness I'm seeing in this idea is whether you can actually get some kind of a controlling signal to these weapon systems in the middle of combat without having something very obvious, acting as an emitter, which would draw the attention of any kind of an anti-radiation missile. Anyway, thanks for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and we're going to get back to the war in Syria, which everybody's saying, this is not over. This is not over at all. Anyway, article coming out of Information Clearinghouse, basically just talking about Nikki Haley, is out there saying that all plans to pull U.S. forces out of Syria have been shelved. And the reason they did that, this was a tacit admission of defeat in Syria. After 7 years, Assad was still running the show. The dodge that we were just there to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda is over because Syria, together with Russia, got rid of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And so now the U.S. is back to just saying, yeah, we're there to overthrow the regime. Now, for you, the American people, I need you to think about this very, very carefully, because we've all grown up being sold wars on the idea of we have to save the people from an evil tyrant, we have to bring them democracy. Assad is not an evil tyrant. It's a democratic state. He's won his elections. International observers are saying their elections are very honest and fair. They have a good system, much better than we do in the United States of America. So now the U.S. government is just out there saying, we're going to invade Syria and kick out the government just because that's what we want to do. Is that something that you want your tax money to go toward? Is that something you are willing to sacrifice your children for? Is that something that makes you proud to be an American? And I think the answer for all three of those questions is going to be no. No, this is not what the United States of America is supposed to be about. Now, as you know, there's been this back and forth about American boots on the ground. We have U.S. Army on the ground, and sometimes they say yes and sometimes they say no. But the U.S. apparently does have a lot of mercenaries. And the Pentagon is now acknowledging that they have 5,500 what they call contractors inside Syria. That's another reason why the war is so expensive, because mercenaries get paid a lot more than conscripted troops do. Now, over at the University of Illinois College of Law, there's a professor, Francis Boyle, and I've linked to him many times through the years, and he's got a very level head. He's a professor of international law, and basically came on out and said that the strike on Syria is indefensible under U.S. law and under international law. And none of these justifications make any sense at all. The U.S. is taking the position that because Assad supposedly gassed his own people, the U.S. has a right to intervene. So Please remember that back on April 19th, 1993, the United States government used a poison gas banned for use in war on a church full of women and children in Waco, Texas. So according to the thinking of the United States government, Russia now has a right to intervene in the United States. Now, obviously, we're 2 days away from Patriots' Day, which was April 19th. It's the anniversary of the attack on Waco. It's the anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord, which pretty much launched the American Revolution. Anniversary of the bombing of the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. It's an ideal date for a staged false flag attack. So everybody needs to be alert. Because right now, the U.S. government is dealing with an American population that is war-weary. We're sick and tired of war. We're sick and tired of bearing the cost of the war. We do not see that there is a moral or legal necessity for any of this. So the U.S. is going to have to do something scary. Just terrorize us into going along with the war agenda. Okay, apparently ISIS resumed their assault on the southeastern countryside of Homs, striking the Syrian Arab army's positions near the town of Muhasa, and apparently didn't do all that well, even with the U.S. flying air support for them in the middle of the night. Iran's senior member of parliament, Aladdin Borajerdi, who's the chairman of the Iranian Parliament's Foreign Policy and National Security Commission, is traveling to Syria to discuss the U.S. attacks on Syria. And I think this signals that Iran is getting ready to increase their support to Syria against the U.S. aggression. Now, Israel all of a sudden is out there talking tough and saying that they have a right to unlimited operations in the airspace over Syria, which is completely nonsense. Nobody has a right to invade somebody else's country, which is what Israel is doing. They're flying in Syrian airspace and they're dropping bombs and missiles. Russia, of course, has been telling Israel they should kind of stay within their own borders. And Avigdor Lieberman, Israel's defense minister, is out there lecturing Russia, saying, you cannot limit our actions in Syria. We're Israel. We will go wherever we want. We will bomb whoever we want, and nobody can stop us. You know, considering that the Jews like to think they're so intelligent and so creative, you'd think they'd come up with a more clever way of handling their disputes other than bomb, kill, bomb, kill, bomb, kill, bomb, kill. We'll be back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones now. James in Ohio. Aloha. Welcome to the show, James. What's on your mind?
Hi. I've been meaning to call in for a few days. Yeah, I was unaware of Patriots' Day, but I do know that April the 20th is Hitler's birthday, and they usually like to celebrate it in some manner or another, like Columbine or the
I'm sorry, I don't feel like sending a birthday card. Call me picky. I'm just not going to send a birthday card.
I'm just saying that we should be watching out for some big event, some kind of staged event, because they usually do something right around this time, somewhere between the 15th and the 20th. And as far as the Syrian airstrikes, over the weekend at least, I had a new respect for Alex Jones, because once I considered the implications for a while, I wept as well, because I know it's the beginning of a slippery slope, and sure enough, he's backing up on TPP, talking about getting back into that and everything. The unfortunate thing about politics on the right is, especially with a strongman type leader, it's a cult of personality, so once they're gone, there usually isn't somebody that can fill their shoes, so we have to figure out what to do. An alternative.
Trump's personality cult is already collapsing. But don't say it's on the right, it's also on the left. Hillary's entire campaign in 2016 was a personality cult focused on her. And right now, it's still largely intact, unfortunately, which is why I'm worried she might actually try and come back in 2020.
Right. Well, that's about all I got for you. I would say that I know anybody who has any common sense wants to resolve everything peacefully, but the more time goes on, the tools with which we have to deal with things are becoming coarser and coarser. The brush broader and broader, and it's either a matter of acquiescing and just going along into the killing chute or not. And that's unfortunate, but that's all I have for you today. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Yeah, it's a very scary time. There's no question about that. And again, I don't think the affairs in Syria are over. Now, Israel is once again back to playing Monday morning quarterback, or if you prefer, spectator. And apparently Israeli intelligence is out there saying that Trump's Syria strike basically was a failure and didn't take out much of anything. Israel would have preferred strikes on Syria's military rather than on these suspected chemical weapons locations, which seems to be turning out didn't have any chemical weapons. A little bit of an embarrassment there for the United States. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be back with hour number 2 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And getting on back to the news here. As I mentioned in the last segment of last hour, Israeli intelligence is out there saying, well, Trump's Syria strike failed. It didn't take out much of anything. And in a different context, they're actually right. Both of the strikes, the one that just happened and the one a year ago, militarily were failures. And it's causing a lot of people to wonder just what is it with these Tomahawk cruise missiles that they can't hit their targets. Now, last year, it was just a classic case of the Tomahawks went off course. They got lost. And this year, it was a case of most of them got shot down. 105 munitions, including Tomahawks, were deployed into Syria. 71 of them were shot down. That's not a very good kill ratio at all. Now, Netanyahu was out there urging more action against Syria and Iran. And my first comment would be, Bibi, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, good luck, and we'll call Assad and Khamenei and tell them you are on your way to kick their butts all by yourself. And I get really sick and tired of Israel basically urging the U.S. to make war on Israel's enemies. And of course, he resorted to the Holocaust. You know, if we don't take out Syria and Iran, there'll be a new Holocaust. Boy, talk about whining, 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 whining. Senator Lindsey Graham is also out there saying Trump needs to act more aggressively in Syria. Okay, here's your rifle, Lindsey. Here's your parachute. Here's your day-glow jumpsuit left over from the CIA's torture centers. Go have fun. And again, Lindsey Graham's statement is proof. He's listening to Benjamin Netanyahu, not to Donald Trump. They all are. 3 weeks ago, Trump was talking about leaving Syria. And Netanyahu gets on the phone, and all of a sudden, the power players in Congress are out there saying, yes, we've got to get tough on Syria. And up in Germany, their foreign minister, Heiko Maas, is saying that Assad cannot be part of the Syria solution. So we're back to the old regime change. We want a U.S. compliant puppet ruler ruling Syria for the benefit of American corporations. And that will be the last stepping stone before the ginned up war against Iran. Now, a senior IDF official, who's not been named, actually confirmed to the New York Times that Israel was responsible for the strike on the T4 airbase. Normally, they don't confirm or deny anything. Attacks, nuclear weapons, it's always ambiguous. But in this case, they're saying, yep, we did it. was a great strike here. Now remember, after the strike first happened and France's Emmanuel Macron came on out trying to grab a little bit of the glory for himself, saying that he had personally convinced Trump to keep the U.S. troops in Syria. The White House has denied it, and now Macron is backpedaling furiously, trying to get away from that. Because this is Trump's war, and Trump doesn't want Macron or Theresa May trying to upstage him. They are such children in the halls of power, or the bowels of power, as it were, here. But just to prove how tough Macron is, he's planning on stripping Assad of the Legion d'Honneur, and it's called the Grand Croix, or the Great Cross. It is the highest award France can award to a civilian, bad news. And it's the highest award that France can give to a foreigner, and it was awarded to Assad by former President Jacques Chirac in 2001, shortly after he took power. And now Macron is going to say, send it back. There, I've shown you. All right, let's take a phone call. Curtis in Nevada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I've been listening to some of these callers regarding the Syria bombing, and I'm kind of disappointed because it seems that there's a lot of people that have a view of what happens, and it's just a face value view of everything. And for example, we all know, I think we all know that everybody involved in this knew. I'm talking about everybody from Putin and Assad to Trump and his generals, that this was a false flag. So when we see Trump actually saying it was Syria, and okay, so we're disappointed because he's lying openly to the American people. But then remember, half the American people actually do believe it was the false flag actually was a chemical attack. Okay, so he can't. I mean, to me, it's like this. He can't tell the truth all the time, no matter what. Okay, this isn't, I mean, in some cases, you have to go along with the narrative, even if you're not really going to go along with the narrative. You know what I mean? You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. I question the idea that half of the American people are buying into this false flag gas attack. I think it's just a very tiny minority, and usually people who are invested in the defense contractors. They want to make money off of all the carnage, and they'll go along with the propaganda so they don't have to feel guilty about the fact that their fortunes are founded on the blood of innocents. But the reason that Trump can't admit that he lied, and the government never admits they lied, is they try and maintain this illusion of governmental infallibility, kind of like the Catholics with papal infallibility. Doesn't matter how bad the Pope screws up, he's still the Pope and he's perfect. And the U.S. government tries to maintain that same illusion, despite obvious embarrassments to the contrary. Again, I mean, the U.S. government is spending huge amounts of resources trying to keep past cover-ups in place. They're still attacking people who question the official story of John F. Kennedy's assassination, Robert F. Kennedy's assassination, Martin Luther King's assassination. It's a huge cost to maintain this backlog of lies and cover-ups. Because if the government ever actually came on out and said to the American people, yes, we've lied to you, the American people would simply stop all support for the government. Even in the case of Saddam's nukes, they've never admitted they'd lied. They said it was just faulty intelligence. That's how they get out of the lies. That's how they get away with no accountability for their war crimes.
Yeah, but Trump did pretty much say they lied without saying they lied. He called them out for, what happened to the weapons of mass destruction. He was basically saying they lied. But, my point being is that Trump is dealing with the deep state, and we see it still with Nikki Haley calling out for the sanctions will be there until we're satisfied. Trump says, no. You see what I mean? In other words, they're still fighting. So it's like you have to go along with your rival's narrative to make them think you're going to do what they're trying to force you to do. But if we look back, now, what did he do? Basically nothing, because you're right. If he actually did take out chemical plants, there would have been thousands of people, injured, that kind of thing. There were no Russians involved. They didn't even find any cash. In other words, in my way of thinking, I'm beginning to think that maybe he did this and he got him again. Yeah,
well, I know that you want to give Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt, but I'm sorry, I don't agree with that. He's fully on board.
No, you're wrong, Mike. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that he fooled them into thinking he's going to do what you're going to do, but he actually did the opposite. He took out tunnels that Syrian soldiers built, prisoners built for the ISIS. He took out, and I mean, in other words, I can see a scenario where he actually did use backdoor channels to say, telling them what I'm going to do, what missiles are going to be effective, which ones aren't going to find their mark or can get shot down. Do you see what I mean?
Well, I hear what you're saying, but again, going back to Occam's razor, Trump basically got put into a corner with this false flag gas attack, and he should have stopped and thought about it. But all of his advisors were saying, oh, yes, Assad did this. Assad's a crazy man, and there's no reason to doubt it. And so Trump went on out on Twitter, started talking real tough, and then he couldn't back down. And so he launched this attack, and he launched it at what he was told were locations where chemical weapons were being manufactured, stored, and loaded into shells. And it's an epic fail, and it's going to come back to haunt him unless they can find another distraction. But Trump is fully on board. He's going along with what the war agenda wants. And the proof of that is that 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now, Trump said he wanted to pull out of Syria, and then immediate reversal. 180 degrees around, and we're back in Syria, and we're killing all kinds of innocent people. So I don't think Trump is playing any kind of a sophisticated game. I don't think he's that subtle. I don't think. I think what you see is what you're getting, and it bodes ill for all of us. Anyway, Curtis, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining the network, and we're going to go back to the phones. Mark in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, how you doing? Look, Mike, I was just on my way home listening to the radio. I turned on Sean Hannity on Sirius XM. This guy is, I know everybody's trying to say, well, he's really a good patriot and this and that. This guy's beneath contempt. He's either very stupid or a big liar. He was talking about that Trump had to do this, weapons of mass destruction, and all this, Saddam Hussein. Bashar Assad has the gas, and comparing to World War I, World War II, and Monica Crowley. I don't know whether you know who she is. She's one of these Fox analysts or whatever, and she calls in. Guess where she's calling in? From Tel Aviv.
Okay.
And she's going how important it is to, that we back up Israel, and that they're doing, and that we stand against the gas, against people who use gas, and how important it is, and the whole nonsense here sometimes. People got to understand. There's the people who say they're conservatives today. A lot of these people that are conservatives, these aren't conservatives. These are phonies. They're so ingrained right now. They're so infiltrated by the neocon movement that what passes for mainstream conservatism and Republicans is really neocon. The only real conservatives are people like you, Ron Paul, Rand Paul, Pastor Chuck Baldwin, and there's others. For the most part, Alex Jones. So Alex Jones has to be very careful because he's starting to run sometimes with the wrong people. With the wrong type of, going for the wrong nonsense and trying to do somersaults in saying that Trump, even though he's wrong, he's still a good guy, and Trump is really, it's not about 40 chess. It's not 40 chess. Trump knows what he's doing. Well, yeah, I think he's not. First of all, he's not that bright, Trump. First of all, he's got the wrong people as advisors. He hired those people. Nobody hired him for him. He could have hired people like, he could have hired somebody like, for instance, McGovern, Ray McGovern. He could have hired, as a national security advisor. He could have hired somebody like Colonel Schaefer.
Yeah.
Anthony Schaefer. He could have hired people like that. He didn't have to hire a bum, neocon scum like John Bolton. He didn't have to do that.
Well, that was to be Sheldon Adelson, who is still the largest contributor to the Trump campaign.
Let me ask you something.
Yeah.
I know that the Mercers basically run Breitbart now, which has become nothing more than pretty much a traditional talk show now. Okay, regular, radio talk show. Filled with me. The Mercers who run them and got rid of Bannon, they got rid of Raheem Assam, got rid of a few others on there. Are they Zionists, or I don't even know if they're Jewish or not, but they could be Christian Zionists too, because a lot of respect, the Holy Roller Christian Zionists and the, and the Mormons are as bad as the Jewish Zionists. They have different reasons for being Zionists. In some ways, they're even crazier because they think only by Jesus will only come back when you have some kind of a Armageddon there, and it has to be in Israel, and only then can Jesus come back. There's that belief, and that the Mormons, they got some even more odd belief about I don't know, somebody from another planet coming down doing it, who they call God, So
I thought that was the Scientologists.
Well, look at Mormons a little bit. You know who you should check out? Webster. What's his name? Webster Tarpley. I don't know if you ever heard of him. Webster Tarpley. Okay, he gives you a rundown of the Mormons. What he said was pretty scary, and I'll tell you the truth. A lot of it matches what I know about the Mormons, because when I first moved to Texas, this was about shortly after 9/11. I'm Amarillo, Texas. I had the Mormons try to convert me, and actually I was listening to them at the time because I believe in God. I just don't believe the organized religions and stuff like that. Just turned me off for the most part. And I started listening to them, and they started going into this thing like the kind of like the ancient aliens, that there's a God from this planet now. He's the God of this, and he used to be a God in another planet or something like that, or And I said, you sound like Van Daniken, Van Daniken's theory.
Okay,
I'm sure you heard of it, right?
Mark, you're kind of wandering all over here. What's the point you're trying to make?
What the point I'm trying to make is this. We've got to stop this influence of these Zionists, whether Jewish, Christian, Mormon, or anything else. We got to start using our common sense and start to practice a Middle East policy that really makes sense, and we look out for our best interests and stop meddling in their affairs. That's all. And I know, and I understand what's causing this. Okay, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, well, basically what it comes down to, I agree with you. The best foreign policy is we leave each other alone and we trade across our borders for goods and services. But the U.S. over the last 30 years has turned itself into a war machine. Our manufacturing has declined. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. We pour all of our money into the machinery of war, and inevitably, when the government looks around, they can see war as their only reasonable option to keep the nation moving forward. And it's a really terrible situation to be in, but that's where we are. Anyway, Mark, we're going to let you go.
I just want to say, I did everything I can. I've been tweeting Trump like crazy, telling him he's a war criminal, that he's got to stop this, that he's got to get the troops out of Syria. I don't care what other stuff he says about the economy or anything else. He needs to get it back. And I suggest other people. I called my congressman, said we got to stop this, and I suggest everybody does that. Fill the airways, what they call blow up the phones, in other words.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Call your members of Congress. I wouldn't bother tweeting to Trump's Twitter feed. I seriously doubt he actually reads it. Because it's got to be flooded. But definitely call your members of Congress and remind them there's an election coming up this November, and the U.S. military interventions will be a deciding factor in how you vote. That's a message they will listen to.
Right. Tell them to stop listening to the Zionists. Crying out loud. I don't care what kind of a Zionist. Jewish, Christian, Mormon, stop listening to them. Even if it's somebody from a Scientology. I don't know what the Scientologists exactly believe. But I don't care who it's from.
They believe in money.
Listening. Huh?
They believe in money.
So do most of them organized religion. But that's besides the point. All right? That's all I'm trying to say.
Okay.
Okay, Mike?
All right. Mark, we're going to let you go there. And after our brief course on comparative religions here, my attitude is that good people do good things, bad people do bad things, and very often they'll all use their religion as an excuse. But it all comes down to we need to keep the bad people from acquiring power. And politics, unfortunately, attracts the very sort of people who should not be allowed to have it. We'll be right back with more phone calls. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we go back to the phones, folks, we are in a serious situation financially. It's not a case of us just wanting your money and your support. We need it. We're down to the wire on this, and we really need you to just come on in and help us stay on the air. Because the alternative, if Republic Broadcasting vanishes, if what really happened vanishes, you're going to have mushroom clouds outside your window. And that's not an exaggeration. So, if you are able to support the network, the address to send check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity, cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number to call in and pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 03. Now, let's get back to the phones here, and we're going to go to Bob in Iowa. Aloha, Bob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello. I sent a check yesterday.
Good, thank you.
I promise not to. You're more than welcome. Mike, we need you. I mean, you got the best show going. Do people even have to be told that? But I promise not to be long-winded out of deference to the last caller. If you were Kim Un, North Korea's leader, and you watched this false flag thing take place, would you get rid of your nuclear weapons?
Of course not.
I sure would.
Of course not. What Trump just did in Syria has ended any possibility of a negotiated denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula.
They got to keep it going. Trump wasn't going to leave Syria or any place else. It's a big dog and pony show. And, you go way back. Russia's been taking on the chin from us. I can't fathom why they keep putting up with it. They took it really on the chin back in the 80s under the Reagan administration. The Reagan administration, Russia was winning against the Muad'Din, or whoever they were. Remember when Russia was fighting them and they just quite a while and protracted war into Afghanistan? Remember that?
Yeah, I remember that.
Okay, you know what? You know why Russia lost? Reagan, behind the scenes, gave them, the enemy of Russia, Stinger missiles.
Yes.
And how he got by with, they were winning. And why Russia didn't do something about that or even bring it up as at the UN and voice their concern, I have no idea.
Well, they did.
Russia.
They did. You need to remember the reason that the Soviet Union went into Afghanistan was they had detected an early effort by the United States of America to regime change Afghanistan. And they went into Afghanistan to basically lock it down in its current pro-Soviet form. And the U.S. carried out a covert war. They used third-party weapons, and the American people were never told that the U.S. was at war with the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, which is why we don't really know where we're at war today. The U.S. acknowledges 7 countries, but it could be a lot more than that. There is a very interesting movie. It's highly romanticized about this called Charlie Wilson's War. If you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth looking at.
You wonder how people like him give so much power behind the scenes and representing the United States to go do our bidding. You know, that's what they want to do, is keep it going. They're trying to they keep getting closer to Russia. They want to stay over there, the United States. And so we just keep pushing right up the doorstep. And they know Syria's offering warm port for Russia's ships and that, so they got some kind of defense out there. And what I like, this didn't get much press, but they didn't hem-haw about it. They come straight out and said, China said, that if you try to invade North Korea, we will stop you. And there's, I don't know how much more clear it can be that, but normally we'd really be saying, oh, hey, you hear that bellicose stuff? Oh, this, that, and they didn't say a word about it. And China will stop us. They've stopped us in Vietnam, Korea, on and on and on. They're going to stop us now, too. One of these days they're going to bring out building as far as
well, that is my concern. That is my concern, that on the day the U.S. government realizes they cannot win a war conventionally against Russia and China, they'll resort to the nuclear weapons. And you need to remember that all this tension with Russia began because the West broke their promise that they made when the Soviet Union collapsed and the Russian republics formed, that NATO would not expand eastward past, I think it was like the eastern border of Germany, or basically Europe, and then immediately went back on that and started bringing more and more of those countries joining Russia into NATO. So from Russia's point of view, that's a clear pattern of continued aggression and encirclement, and Russia doesn't want to go along with that. These wars are largely about control of natural resources to feed industries and corporations. Anyway, listen, Bob, I need to let you go. We got to take another break for commercials.
Okay.
We'll be right back.
Thank you.
Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go right back to the phones. The lines are just loaded up. We're going to have to close the lines in a little bit because I do have news to get to. Steve Elkins, aloha. Welcome back to the show. What is on your mind today?
Well, you had a couple callers back that mentioned why presidents lie, and they always lie to us, and it's true, they do. And that goes back a long ways. But he mentioned about the false flag. Of course, that is a taboo word. You will never hear in Washington other than Ron Paul. He's out of Washington, really. He's now a spectator. But you'll never hear a politician use the term false flag. You'll never hear a president talk false flag, because then they have to go back and explain it to the American people what a false flag is. And then Americans would basically look back in history and say, well, maybe that was something the United States carried out and blame somebody else for.
Yes.
I remember a while back, maybe I'll ask John if he can put it back on the website again, there's an article, 45 admitted false flags that the United States admitted to. That's a really good article to look and read. But again, like I said, it's a taboo word. Mainstream media will never use this word. Nobody in D.C. will use it other than Ron Paul. You're surely never going to hear a president saying, well, false flags. It's never going to happen.
Nope, it's never going to happen. By the way, the count is up to 56 acknowledged false flags, and for every one that is officially acknowledged, there's probably dozens that are still classified.
Right. Last thing is about the U.S.-Syria attack and Israel doing yesterday's attack on Syria. You know, I also saw that when the Pentagon came out and said 100% of their missiles hit their target, I saw that to be a campaign for commerce, not only to resupply the weapons they just lost and used, which we ended up totaling, looks like $1.4 million per missile, 105 missiles. It looks like about $147 million is gone now.
Yes.
So I think when the Pentagon decided to show some accuracy, and of course that was an absolute lie, 100%, you know, they're going to try to sell some of these weapons too, so that might bring some commerce to them. But that's kind of how I saw that picture.
Well, it's not just the $147 million for the Tomahawks themselves. It's the cost of operating the ships and airplanes, the salaries for all the people involved. So it was actually a lot more money was spent than just the money for the weapons themselves.
Yeah, but that absolute lie. And it's interesting now because Israel comes back and said, well, basically said to the Pentagon, you lied. 100%, if you got 100%, there was no need for us to go back in there and take out some of these suspected weapons, chemical weapons plants. So, you know, now the Pentagon generals all have egg on their face because they just lied. And but that is something for a fact that you'll never hear the word false flag. You will never, ever hear anybody use that word in D.C., mainstream media, and you'll certainly never hear a president ever say false flag. Never.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true.
That's it.
Okay.
That's it, Mike. Thanks.
All right,
Appreciate it.
thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Rick in Arizona. Aloha, Rick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Hi, Mike.
Hi.
I think with what's at stake here and the risks involved, most likely scenario here is nothing that was even launched into Syria. I don't even think you could get a commander on the high seas to take an order from Trump to risk hitting the wrong people. So in my mind, I think the whole thing is a hoax.
Well,
and it's going to.
I tend to disagree because we're getting footage from inside Syria of all these smashed up buildings.
The whole Middle East is half smashed up. That could be file footage from the Iraq War or any other war. I'm just thinking it's probably a hoax because the technology has put our ships on the high seas at risk. Ragtag people can shoot a missile and sink a destroyer. I mean, I'm just thinking, I just don't see these commanders starting a war for Trump. And thank you for taking my call.
Well, you're welcome, and we're just going to have to agree to disagree on that because we do know that both last year and currently, the missiles really did go on into Syria because satellite images showed the damage that they caused. And to try and carry off a hoax that large, you'd have everybody in Syria saying, we never saw any missiles, we never heard any missiles, we never heard any explosions. That's a little bit out there. I'm sorry. All right, let's go over to Lisa in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. I hope you're doing as well as can be expected. Before I ask my question, I was wondering, could you repeat the phone number again to donate? I think I'm going to be able to give you a few dollars.
Okay, well, that phone number is 800-724-2719, extension 03.
Okay, because there's very few people that talk about the war zones and our imperialism, basically. You are one of them, and a lot of people who are true lefties, like real progressive thinkers. Jimmy Dore would be one, for example. I know you've heard of him.
Yes.
That talks about these ridiculous wars and all that jazz, and you do too. So I appreciate that you do that, and that's the reason I tune in. I have a question. I don't understand, and maybe I thought you could explain it to me, and certainly I can't be the only one who doesn't get it, and maybe your listeners would benefit. It's my understanding that we have not officially declared war since World War II. Is that true or false?
That's actually true. Everything since World War II has been a police action or we're meddling in somebody else's war.
Okay, because I was wondering how can the United States get away, like under what provision are they able to do this all of the time? Could you help me out there?
Well, there is no provision. These are all illegal under U.S. law, under international law, absent a United Nations Security Council resolution and absent a declaration of war by Congress. It is actually illegal for the president to just haul off and blow up other people's countries.
Right. Okay, that's what I thought. But it's so blatant. I thought, my God, maybe they're trying to use some war provision I've never heard of or something. It's unbelievably blatant, but it doesn't surprise me in the least. And so I just wanted some clarification on that. Actually, your second to the last caller answered my other question. So I'm wondering, the 45 or now 56 false flags, are those up on your website? Is there an article about that?
I'm just now putting up the article that I have right now. It'll take about 5 minutes for the cache to cycle, and then it'll be basically at the top of the main page.
Excellent. That's all I need. I know you're packed with callers. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right. You've got it. And by the way, there's another article that's linked to the little gray permanent article menu bar at the top, which changes occasionally. But those are articles I think people should be reading. And one of them is called Of the Liars, By the Liars, and For the Liars, which basically lays out how rulers have lied to the ruled for thousands and thousands of years. I think the first example I have in there was Ramses the Great lying to the people of Egypt about his victory over the Hittites, which was a lie.
Wow. Right, okay. Well, that sounds great. I'll check that out, and I will call this other number probably tomorrow.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go and switch over to Vivian in Canada. Aloha, Vivian. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Your show is becoming addictive. I truly welcome your show every day. One name, Moshe Arens, A-R-E-N-S. He was claiming that Bashar's father, Hafez al-Assad, was killing his people 40 years ago. Israel has been beating the same drum for 40 years in order to get the world to approve of Israel claiming what it believes is its entitlement. So these things that we now consider to be false flags are basically their strategy of fulfilling their entitlement to whatever they want, whenever they want.
Yes.
It's kind of frightening. The other thing, I was born in Bethlehem, so I know a little bit about the region. I've been following for a long time, and I was especially suspicious during the Arab Spring, the so-called spontaneous riots and demands for democracy. We do not recognize, even if you go to Arut Sheva, which is an online Jewish or Israeli newspaper.
Yes.
Even now, they're using Mizrahi Jews to infiltrate Arab circles in order to instigate actions or in order to spy on them. In fact, I was once approached to be a double agent. People don't know how widespread the tentacles of the Mossad actually are, and all of the intelligence agencies that cooperate with it worldwide for whatever they perceive to be their mutual interests. And then one final name is Jacob Schiff. How long has Israel been controlling events and monetary influences in the U.S.? It has. If it ever was truly an independent nation, it was very brief, and it has since been controlled by not only those who contributed funds to the different war actions. The whole history of the U.S. is one of war and military actions and dispossession and brutality. In fact, it's the history of humankind, and I hate to sound so pessimistic, but anyway. I know you're aware of the exchange rate with regard to the Canadian currency and the USD currency.
Yes.
I admire your show so much that I will try to make some kind of contribution. But please keep up the good work. Oh, one final thing. Someone has suggested you invite Steve Pachenik onto your show.
Yes.
I would question the integrity of, as I said before in my call yesterday, I believe Israel works both sides.
Yes.
I think they have people in the left so that they can control the dialogue and the actions of the left. And I don't know if Steve Pachenik falls into that role, but I would say he probably does, because he's been given too much latitude in this criticism of Israel, which I find very questionable. And the same thing with people like Noam Chomsky. He's got his fingers into all the left dialogue. That's just something we have to keep in mind, that the best way to control your opposition is to have your people in the camp of the enemy or the opposite side. I'll let you go. And again, please continue your good work.
For as long as I can, or as long as it's necessary. I keep thinking there'll come a day when it won't be necessary for me to do this, either the website or the radio show, and I can spend the rest of my life as Claire's roadie. But obviously we're going in the wrong direction. Okay, our last caller hung up. We're going to close the lines here, and because I'm way behind on the talking points. Little program note here: John Stadmiller is going to have Harley Schlanger on his show today, immediately following my show. So definitely you want to tune in for that. All right, let's get on back to Syria, where Trump is locked and loaded for greater aggressions. And it's kind of frustrating to see all these people who are out there cheering on locked and loaded, we've got to do that. They're not in the combat zone. We need to go back to the way the world was when leaders who wanted war would lead their own troops into battle. Like Alexander the Great or Napoleon. It's very frustrating here. Now, Donald Trump is now asking Saudi Arabia and others to establish an Arab army to replace the U.S. in Syria. He's trying to do damage control for going back on his comment from 3 weeks ago about pulling out of Syria, then we go on, we blow up the place. So Trump wants Saudi Arabia and other countries in the area to form a united Arab army to replace the U.S. in Syria. But if ISIS is kicked out of Syria, why does there need to be any army at all inside Syria other than Syria's army? It's a little logic flaw there, although they're still trying to figure out a way that they can get Assad. Apparently over in Russia, the attack on Syria has not been accepted very well by people. Apparently the Russians are burning effigies of Donald Trump, which is a little childish, obviously, but it does display the feeling of the people over there. Now, apparently, the Russian fleet in the Mediterranean is having a lot of fun chasing around a British Astute-class submarine. And this is something that actually happens quite often. This is not war, this is not combat, but very often anti-submarine surface forces and submarines will get into this little game where the submarine will try and get close to them to hone their attack skills. They get detected, the fleet comes back, and they carry out what's called a hold-down exercise, which is basically to deny the submarine the ability to surface and replenish its air or replenish its batteries. Again, it's how they refine their skills. But it does remind us all of how close to real war this is getting. Over the commercial break, I'm going to take a look at the Astute class and see if it's diesel, electric, or nuclear. Well, the Syria airstrikes have been good for the defense contractors. Collectively, all of their stock went up $10 billion. War is good for the defense business. It's lousy for everybody else. But let's see. Listener wonders whether a military tribunal should be used against corrupt members, officials, and governments who aren't following the Constitution. I say give it a try. Most military people I know are strict constitutionalists. And I know the idea of a military coup sounds very, very scary, and it hasn't always worked out in the past in other countries. But we can't stay on the path we're on now, or this nation will be utterly destroyed, in my opinion. Anyway, getting on back to the economics of war. So war is good for the war business. It's not good for the rest of us. The defense contractor stocks are all up. And so everybody who's invested in them are happy. They're making money off of all the carnage here. And that may explain why Theresa May was so gung-ho about going into Syria, because it turns out her husband, Philip May, works for a company called Capital Group, which is also the second largest shareholder in Lockheed Martin. So the May family is making money off of all of this. Theresa May spends the British public's money on this attack and then rakes in the dough from her stock portfolio, or her husband's stock portfolio. And by the way, has anybody besides me noticed that the part of Syria now occupied by the U.S. is the part that contains the oil, the water, and the gas? Just something to keep in mind when you're trying to figure out why this war continues to rage. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha America, welcome back to our show. Now, the European Union has been debating on a new round of sanctions against Iran, mostly because Trump has been arm-twisting them to ramp up pressure on Iran. And the EU failed to agree on these new sanctions, which means they're not happening. And everybody's concerned about this Trump deadline, which is nearing, and the indications are that Trump is going to unilaterally pull out of the P5+1 deal because he says it was a terrible deal. Everybody else disagrees. Iran is not working on nuclear weapons. Iran is not enriching uranium. Why is that a bad deal? Well, because it didn't include those long-range missiles. See, this is a continuation of a pattern that is playing out in country after country after country after country. The U.S. goes on in and they apply economic and diplomatic pressure to try and get a country to get rid of their weapons of deterrence. They did it in Iraq. They convinced Saddam to give up his chemical, biological weapons. He never had nukes, with the promise that this would guarantee Iraq's security. Then the U.S. invaded twice. They did it with Libya. They convinced Libya to give up their very fledgling nuclear activities with the promise that it would make Libya safe. Then the U.S. invaded Libya. They did it with Syria. Bashar al-Assad surrendered all of his chemical weapons under international supervision because he was told that would make the U.S. happy and he would be safe. And then the U.S. invaded. And now they're trying to do it to Iran. They're trying to get Iran to give up their weapons of deterrence to make it easier to invade. And as I'm told that caller, what Trump just did in Syria ends any possibility that North Korea is going to surrender their weapons of deterrence, because the pattern is repeating all over again. Now, if Trump pulls out of the P5+1 deal, Iran is planning on teaming up with China on nuclear development. They're already partners with Russia to build their power stations, which, by the way, they're allowed to have under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And so now they're talking to China about help with their nuclear program. And again, doesn't mean they're building bombs. It just means they're going back to being self-sufficient. Now, here is breaking news, and I think this supports something I speculated about a couple of weeks ago when they said North and South Korea's leaders were actually going to get together and talk. North and South Korea may announce an official end to the Korean War. It's only been lingering in this sort of twilight zone for about 50 years. But apparently one of the things that will come out of the meeting between Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un is an official declared end of the Korean War. Now that immediately undermines the U.S. justification for being in South Korea. And that may be what Moon Jae-in definitely wants. We're going to take a break for commercials. Back with Hour 3 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And the phone lines are still closed. I'm trying to play catch up from all the phone calls this morning here. Over in the South China Sea, the People's Liberation Army of China is building what they call the Underwater Great Wall. And basically, it's a combination of a network of permanently stationed ships and subsurface sensors in the South China Sea. Now, for people who are a little bit older, they remember the Cold War, the U.S. had such a system in both the Atlantic and the Pacific, and it was called SOSUS. And it was this network of undersea cables and hydrophones that stretched all over the ocean. And they could hear anything that was passing overhead, apparently even through the thermocline. And as a matter of fact, the wreck of the Scorpion was detected by sound traces that were captured on the SOSUS sensors. Well, when the Cold War ended, maintaining SOSUS and CERTAS and all those other things was deemed too costly and unnecessary, so the SOSUS nets were actually turned over to marine biologists to track whales with. Whether they're still operational today or not, I don't know, but it's obvious that China has decided this would be something really useful to have around the islands in the South China Sea. It would make an approach by either surface ship or submarine that much more difficult. So they're getting ready. Everybody knows what's coming, and everybody's getting ready any way that they can. And by the way, that should apply to you. If this war really comes on, there's going to be shortages, there are going to be blackouts, there are going to be all kinds of issues, and if you're not a prepper already, you need to start. And being a prepper is more than just buying a bunch of stuff and packing it away in the garage. You've got to work with it. You've got to learn how to use it. It does take a certain degree of maintenance. You've got to learn some basic rules. Never store batteries inside electronics because most modern electronics have what are called soft switches that still draw current. And after a while, the batteries will rupture and corrode. Just all kinds of things like that. I really ought to do a prepper show at some point. Anyway, yeah, you should be preparing for this. Storable food, storable water, extra prescription medications. There are going to be disruptions. And if you're living near a first strike target the way Claire and I are doing, you might want to pick up a tube of 2 million sunblock. Now, over in Israel, actually in the town of Sebastia, which is in the northern West Bank, a group of Israeli settlers, guarded by the Israeli army, stormed a historic archaeological site. And the mayor of Sebastia, Mohammed Azim, said that a number of settlers broke into the site amid the protection of the army, who then closed the area for other visitors. And apparently there were some confrontations and protests. And Israel's relationship to archaeology is rather a matter of history. Israel relies on archaeology to try and justify their claims that they've always been there, that there are no Palestinians. And this is not the first time that archaeology showing the presence of the Palestinians in ancient times has come under attack. And Israel is not above faking archaeological evidence. Remember the story about the pomegranate temple staff, which was supposed to be proof the first temple actually existed. That turned out to be a forgery. And the Jehoash tablet, which was supposed to be proof that the second temple existed. That turned out to be a hoax. And Israel must feel very frustrated, because if you go into any other country in the region, Iraq, Iran, especially Egypt, you can't take 2 steps without tripping over some reminder of that culture's ancient past. And you go to Israel, and there's nothing. There's nothing that supports the stories of the great kingdom of David and Solomon in the Bible. Now, they've named some buildings, David's tomb and so forth and so on, but archaeologists can't actually say that's really what they are. So there's been a war over archaeology for a long time. You probably all heard the story of Masada. It was this last stronghold of these Israelites who fought the Romans to the death and then killed themselves rather than be taken as slaves. The problem is that the graves on Masada were found to contain animal bones, including pig bones, which was something that Roman burials had, and obviously Jewish burials would not have. So Israel gets very creative with the interpretation of the archaeological sites that they do find here. Israeli soldiers have abducted 13 Palestinians in the West Bank. That brings the number of Palestinians abducted by Israel to 1,928 this year. And these Palestinians are basically taken. There are no charges. There are no arrests. Very often they're simply tortured and released. It's a campaign of terror. It's exactly what it is. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. There's been another incident where Israeli forces have shot and killed a Gaza fisherman. And one of the reasons this is such an issue is because Israel arbitrarily changes the limit on Gaza's territorial waters. One day it'll be 6 miles, one day it'll be 7, then it'll be 5. And if you're not up to date on it, you can be on the wrong side of the line. In this case, the boat was only 3 miles from Gaza's shoreline and was heading back toward Gaza when it was attacked. Now, Israel's still dealing with the March for Land protests, and I've noticed the corporate media has stopped mentioning anything about it whatsoever, because this has turned into a public relations nightmare for Israel's government. But Israel is still out there proving how petty they can be. They are now sanctioning the owners of the buses that simply took the people of Gaza to the border. And, I mean, they're buses. Their business is taking people from point A to point B. And Israel now wants to sanction them for that. Interestingly enough, a year ago, there was a top Israeli general who came on out and said that modern-day Israel really is a lot like 1930 Nazi Germany. Apparently, this Major General Yair Golan is refusing to back down on the comment. And we've put up a few articles ourselves saying that, yeah, Israel, far from having learned anything from what the Nazis supposedly did to them, is out there behaving horribly. And of course, Israel is out there trying to make it illegal to compare Israel with Nazi Germany. The comparisons are obvious. Now, over at the New York Slimes, for a while it looked like they might provide an honest reporting of what was going on along the border between Israel and Gaza, especially with the snipers. But somebody made a phone call, and the New York Times is back to their normal one-sided reporting. There was a tweet that came on out saying that the protesters had tied a bomb to a kite and were trying to fly it over the fence to attack the snipers. Utterly no confirmation on it at all, and apparently the New York Times just said, okay, they're the bad people, we have to go back to calling them the bad people. Now, over in the West Bank, Israel's getting ready to build a light rail system to connect the settlements, the illegal settlements, and now they're going to have a light rail system. I hope they have better luck with it than the one that we have down here at the bottom of the hill. And of course, what are they going to do for the land underneath the rail system? Well, they're going to just take it from the Palestinians. Oh, and by the way, the light rail system is for settlers only. The Palestinians are not allowed to use it. Well, apparently ISIS is out there hurling out the propaganda, claiming that they are planning to bomb a New York subway. Apparently they're talking about another attack on Paris. And they're talking about attacking the World Cup finals in Russia. So here we are, right on time to stoke the war fires. I said earlier in the show, there's going to be a false flag to try and get the American people back on board with the war agenda. I don't think a bomb on a New York subway is going to do it, because we're all expecting that to happen. Nikki Haley is still out there screaming that Assad is going to drop poison gas on some American city. But they are desperate. And they don't want to give up. They don't want to admit that they've been doing wrong. They don't want to admit that they've been lying to us. So they're just escalating. And it's already on the cusp of madness, what they're doing. One of the other false flag alerts is out there is they're saying that Putin is going to hack computers. And Russian cyber agents are going to cripple laptops, phones, and critical infrastructure. Booga, booga, booga. It's a virtual 911. And we talked about a virtual 911. We even wrote an article about it not too long ago. Actually, it was a while ago. Where the U.S. could shut down major sections of the internet and claim it was Iran or North Korea or Russia. Remember when they blamed North Korea for the Sony hack and they were just out there pounding hard on that on the corporate media? Then it turned out it was an internal leak. It's more of the same. And the corporate media is still fully on board with the war agenda. Over at the BBC, Anita McVeigh was out there literally trying to silence questions about what happened in Syria, saying that we're in an information war with Russia and we've got to get on board. In other words, if the government and the BBC are lying, you've got to support those lies or Russia will win the information war. No, the truth is going to win the information war. That's where victory is going to go. All right, turning to our domestic news here, I'm probably going to have to take most of these talking points into tomorrow. Apparently, Trey Gowdy is requesting that the Department of Justice Inspector General Horowitz appear before the House Oversight Committee on May 8th. Now, Horowitz himself is predicting that their report on the Clinton email scandal investigation will be out also in May, to be followed by public testimony. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because we know Hillary is an untouchable, both because of that Clinton Foundation, which everybody inside the Beltway seems to be dirty with, and because a scandal of the magnitude that I suspect lies behind that email server would bring down the entire government. And I'm sure Hillary's out there making phone calls saying, you know, you've got to stop this. If this comes out, all of you are out of jobs. And so even people who cannot stand Hillary Clinton personally are working to protect her out of their own self-interest. Now, as you know, James Comey is in the middle of his 15 minutes of fame. He's out there with his book, and he basically did this interview on ABC. And apparently, FBI insiders were not pleased with him and basically just described him as a self-centered donkey. There's another word that goes in there, but I can't say it, or our affiliates will lose their FCC licenses. Because even though the U.S. government is committing war crimes all over the planet, we're not allowed to use bad words on radio to prove that we are a just and moral people. Now, Tom Fitton over at Judicial Watch has pointed out that Comey has admitted there were hundreds of thousands of Hillary emails found on Anthony Weiner's laptop. Judicial Watch was told only 72,000 were recovered. So apparently evidence was being withheld from Judicial Watch, despite the court orders. Cover-up after cover-up after cover-up. And apparently this also came out of that ABC interview. Joe DiGenova is out there describing Comey as having single-handedly destroyed the FBI. He has to be charged with crimes and for lying to Congress, and he ought to be. But he didn't single-handedly destroy the credibility of the FBI. The FBI has been destroying its own credibility going all the way back at least to COINTELPRO. And there's a permanently linked article about COINTELPRO at my website. You might want to read it. Big stink back in the 60s. That's when America found out just how pervasive the intelligence operation on our own people was. And it's worse today. Now, apparently, not a lot of people tuned in to James Comey's ABC interview. According to The Hollywood Reporter, ABC averaged 9.8 million viewers and a 2.4 rating in the 25 to 54 demographic. That pretty much covers everybody who might actually be interested. That's bad ratings. People don't want to listen to Comey anymore. He's got nothing to say. Jim Jordan is now out there saying that there was, in fact, pressure from Loretta Lynch to shut down the probe into the Clinton so-called charitable foundation. That's where all the corruption comes together. It's a big, black, rotting ball of corruption, and everybody was tangled up, one way or the other, like a giant Gordian knot. Slush fund, tax avoidance, money laundering. And a lot of people are starting to say, where did all the money for the charitable purposes go, especially down in Haiti? The Clinton Foundation raised a huge amount of money, waving Haitians around following the earthquake. Hardly any of that money got down there. The Haitian government is saying the Clintons just exploited them to just make more money. So let us talk now about what's going on with the Michael Cohen case. Because apparently the judge, Kimba Wood, did the services at George Soros' wedding. Judges are allowed to marry people. Used to be ship captains could, they can't anymore. But the judge did it. And by the way, she's also a former Playboy bunny. Now, George Soros is now out there demanding that all the Cohen records be placed in federal searchable database. He wants everybody looking in there to try and find some dirt. all of this is a violation of attorney-client privilege. They're desperate to find something. Something that's impeachable, something that they can invoke the 25th Amendment on. Last Friday was possible. Now, as you know, this judge, Kimba Wood, basically outed Sean Hannity as Michael Cohen's third unknown client. And immediately everybody jumped on it. Oh, he's got something to hide. He's got... And Sean Hannity basically came on out and said the situation is that he once called for some advice, but he never retained Michael Cohen. He never got an invoice. He never paid Michael Cohen for legal fees. They just had some occasional conversations. And to their credit, Fox News is standing behind Sean Hannity. But it almost reveals this almost piranha-like ferocity in Trump's critics. They're just grabbing onto anything they think might lead to pay dirt. I'm mixing my metaphors there. Now, over at the Federal Communications Commission, where they're still trying to keep a straight face after taking away net neutrality, although the states are starting to fight back on that, their chairman, Ajit Paj, basically selected a broadband advisor to run a federal advisory committee. And apparently, the advisor, Elizabeth Pierce, has just been arrested on fraud charges. Pierce allegedly raised more than $250 million from two New York-based investment companies using forged contracts with other companies guaranteeing hundreds of millions of dollars in future revenue. Pierce resigned from Quintillion in August of last year, and she's now been arrested. Do we not have any honest, honorable people left in Washington, D.C.? It seems like honest and moral people are an endangered species inside that beltway. We're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, Gomer is out there saying that Rod Rosenstein could very well be under investigation in connection with the Uranium One deal, which he supervised, and he soft-pedaled to allow Hillary to get her colleagues to approve the sale of our uranium to Russia through Uranium One. And so Louis Gohmert is saying he's got no problem with impeaching Rosenstein. And he ought to be. That's another big issue that needs to come on out, that Uranium One deal. And it involves huge amounts of money donated to the Clinton Foundation by the people behind the Uranium One purchase. It's uranium that the United States cannot afford to be without. We have to import uranium as it is, even before the Uranium One deal, because much of our current uranium ore is locked under these national monuments, which are in fact serving as collateral for other countries loaning money to us. Now, Trump is accusing Russia and China of playing a currency devaluation game. Now, when you have two trading countries, it's counterintuitive. Most people think, I want my money to be worth more, so when I travel to other countries, I can buy all kinds of things for pocket change, which is really kind of good. But when you're talking about import and export, the currency that has the lower value has a bit of an advantage, because it means their products are less expensive for the other country to import. And we had that caller who called into the show yesterday talking about how Trump is talking about devaluating our currency, which is going to be a problem, and not just for the tourists, because so much of what we buy in our stores is an import. It means we're going to be paying more for it. Now, China has backtracked. They're now abandoning all barriers for foreign automakers, and that's a concession to Donald Trump. So they're going to keep on making cars over there, and they're going to allow foreign owners of their auto industry. China, on the other hand, has slapped a 179% tariff on U.S. sorghum, right after the U.S. banned exports to China's ZTE. So this trade war thing is going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Now, if you're a fan of Top Gear or its spin-off on Amazon, the Grand Tour, you know that they tend to make a lot of fun of the Vauxhall car, which are ultra low cost. They're cheap cars for people who don't want to spend a lot of money in cars. Don't have the money for a Bugatti Veyron, you get a Vauxhall. Well, apparently Vauxhall is about ready to go away. Top Gear is going to have to find somebody else to poke fun at. They're closing all of their 326 British dealerships because sales have been off. And this will affect 3,700 British jobs. Now, Jaguar Land Rover, which is a good brand, highly respected, they're saying that they're going to have to let 1,000 of their staff go. People just don't have the money to buy what these companies are making. Down at the bottom of the hill, we have an old abandoned drive-in movie theater. And it used to be the site of this wonderful little flea market that happened every weekend. And Claire and I used to go down there. We'd buy local produce from the local farmers, and we find all kinds of weird things that were cool to have for just a few bucks. Well, the flea market is now gone, and this lot is being used as an overflow lot for all the car dealerships on the island of Oahu. And it is just filled and filled with 2018 cars, 2017 cars. The dealerships apparently are under contractual obligation to accept so many cars. They don't know where to put them. There was a Ford dealer that was advertising on the radio. They'd lost the lease on their overflow lot, and they were literally having to sell the cars at below cost just to get them off that lot and not have to pay any penalties. But people just don't have money because it's been sucked out of us to feed the war machine. Wages and salaries are being hammered down to keep us poor, to keep us weak, to keep us struggling. And in the process, the economy is being destroyed because consumerism was the major part of the U.S. economy, and it is just withering on the vine. Experts are saying we're going to see a flood of retail closures this year. Iconic stores. Sears is closing a bunch. Walmart is closing a bunch. They just can't make it anymore. Claire and I go down to this little shopping mall at the bottom of the hill, and we'll walk around. We'll see a lot of other people walking around. Very, very few bags. They're wandering around and dreaming of being able to buy the things they see, but they're not actually buying. We'll be right back after these commercials. Aloha America, welcome back to the show here. We're talking about the economic news, and the news is bad pretty much all over. I know the stock market was up today, driven mostly by all those military stocks that are doing really well. They're looking forward to more blood, more carnage, because that means more profit for them. Over in New York, at the Trump Tower, their condo prices are nosediving. And Trump may turn out to be one of the very few presidents to lose money while in office. Now, Russia is dumping U.S. debt. They've reduced their holdings to the lowest in a year, and they may continue to do so. That's one way both Russia and China could basically express their ire, is to start dumping U.S. treasuries. And what would happen then, of course, is the Federal Reserve would just create a whole bunch of money out of thin air and buy back those treasuries. They've already been doing it to try and deal with the fact that there is a treasury bond bubble out there. But of course, the more money the Federal Reserve creates out of thin air, the more inflationary pressure is pushing down the value of the dollar. Now, the European Union is threatening new sanctions against Syria, but pointedly not against Russia. And as you know, Trump backed off his plan to hit Russia with new sanctions. So it's a very, very tense game. And again, Putin and Trump are just nose to nose, trying to stare each other down. Getting on over to the European Union, immigration, so forth. Angela Merkel's joint Eurozone reforms with Macron are being restricted by German conservatives. This is a major blow to the European powers. Now, Macron and Merkel are on the side of integrating the EU into a single country. They want to federalize it. They want Brussels to be the European equivalent of Washington, D.C., and the member nations of the European Union to be reduced to the status of similar to a state here in the United States. Now, as you know, Alex Jones got sued by the gentleman identified as Mr. Posner over Alex Jones reporting that there were reasons to doubt the Sandy Hook shooting even took place. And we all remember all of the reasons to doubt the official story on that one, most especially that one actor who came outdoors to see the cameras, and he's laughing and he's joking, and then he sort of has to work himself down to look like he's sad for the cameras. That was a very damning video. Well, apparently, Posner was asked under the rules of discovery to provide documentation that he really is Mr. Posner, and not just some actor using an adopted name. And at that point, Posner withdrew the lawsuit. In other words, he couldn't prove that he was who he claimed to be. So good for Alex Jones. And maybe this will cause them to back off from Wolfgang Halbig as well. Out in California, Governor Moonbeam is refusing to send the National Guard to the southern border. And legally, technically, he does have that right. But again, a case could be made that he is aiding and abetting illegal immigrants. That's a Title VIII violation, with one count per illegal immigrant being helped, which in California number in the millions. This is a guy who ought to be going to jail. Now, California, apparently having nothing else to concern itself with, is now going after homeschoolers. They don't like the idea of homeschooling. These kids might actually learn something we, the government, don't want them to know. They could actually be taught how to think critically and analytically. That's dangerous. We need dumbed down, mindless drones to secure the future of our country. We've been talking a lot about police brutality, and we've been talking about, along with prescription psychiatric medication, the use of Israeli security companies to train our domestic police force, to basically treat the American people the way the IDF treats the Palestinians, which, as we have seen recently, is not very, very good. But apparently, the Durham City Council in North Carolina has basically voted to end the program. They don't want the Israelis teaching police officers military-style training anymore, because the officers come out of there with a shoot first, ask questions later mentality, just like the IDF snipers down there on the border with Gaza. Now, you remember Dick's Sporting Goods capitulated to David Hogue and the gun grabbers by basically pulling their sporting rifles off the shelves and not being able to find anyone else to buy them. Dick's Sporting Goods lost a huge part of its customer base there. They're now destroying the unsold rifles, and that really is a waste. At the very least, you could have given them to the local police department. That was not really thought out very well at all. Okay, this happened here locally. I got a lot of emails early today saying, are you guys okay? You guys are okay? And I'm saying, yeah, we're fine here. And it turns out, over on the island of Kauai, which is the next island out that way, they got 2 feet of rain, actually a little more than that, in just 24 hours. And it triggered landslides. The Kuhio highway is cut off. They're having to evacuate people by helicopter and boats. And it's just huge amounts of flooding. And this is an issue for us. We have a very good friend who lives in Honolulu. She's an artist. Her home is up on stilts, so that's okay. But her art studio was at ground level, so they're having to basically dig the muck out from under that as well. There was another article she sent me where they're saying it will be years before the region recovers from this one. Now, Kauai does have a reputation of being very wet. In the center of the island, there's a mountain, Mount Waialeale, which is the wettest place on Earth. They get 450 inches of rain every single year. I mean, that's the average. Some years it's worse, some years it's not quite so bad. But yes, it's a very wet situation out there. And I'm wondering how Mark Zuckerberg's place fared, because it's on the flats, it's on the lowlands here. Remember the Keystone Pipeline? Supposed to be state-of-the-art, and its supporters said it would never leak. Of course, they say that about every pipeline that gets built across somebody else's land here. Apparently, it had one of the largest inland oil spills last November, and it was kept under wraps until now. They don't want you thinking about pipelines and oil spills. That's bad. You might object to a pipeline where we want to put one, and we can't allow that. Now, here's a story that came from Natural Health 365, and it has to do with a study of vaccines and their possible link to autoimmune diseases. Now, the National Institutes of Health estimate 23.5 million Americans suffer from some form of autoimmune disease, and the number is growing. Now, a lot of people are starting to wonder, is the problem with some of these chemicals that we're being injected with? Well, a pair of Italian scientists went on out and they surveyed a whole bunch of human vaccines, and every single one they tested revealed toxic substances linked to autoimmune disease. Now, while you digest that, remember the business model of the medical industrial complex is that you must be kept chronically ill so that they can make more money off of you. Curing you is a bad business model. They want you constantly being treated for something. All right, let's take a phone call. Mark in Georgia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, let's see. Let me get you here first. I'm not going to mention which rideshare program I just recently got involved in because that might put me in an awkward position. But I was just reading online that one of the major rideshare applications that you hit on your smartphone is giving free rides to March for Our Lives. Let's see, is it appropriate to use the term useful idiots, or what kind of...
Well, why would you call them useful idiots?
Oh, you want to ride to take part in this? Yeah, sorry?
Why would you call them useful idiots? I mean, people genuinely support... the March for Life. I thought you meant the March for Lands. Okay, yeah, I understand what you're talking about.
They're giving free rides to people that are involved in this. Well, let's disarm law-abiding citizens. And I was just reading that in Britain, they're having a big upshoot in machete attacks.
Yes.
Surprise, surprise. What do you expect of law-abiding citizens being disarmed? And it's like, look, you're only looking at the murder rate involving firearms, but you're ignoring anybody that gets killed with knives and baseball bats and whatever else. And I'm like, excuse me. And so the thing is that people need to understand it. That's one of the things that a lot of this hysterics about spree shootings. You're right about SSRIs. That's definitely a factor. There is a very clear agenda of fear-mongering people into, it's, what is it said, that people will lose their minds in a stampede, but they'll come to their senses one by one. Is that about right?
That's about right, but I think more and more people are coming to their senses.
Yeah, because there's what the people are told and sold, and then there's what they actively avoid telling us. And once we deal with what they're actively avoid telling us, people, wait a minute. It's like for me, when I saw Building 7 go straight down its own footprint, I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Why am I only finding out about this in 2005? And when people realize that disarming the masses only increases violent crime, and we are talking about, when I speak of the lawful militia, I think one of the functions of the militia is to teach people gun safety, to make sure that people know how to handle firearms in a manner that's very safe for the law-abiding and with grave peril for the lawbreakers. And if that happens to include, like I tried to explain to this police officer with his SWAT uniform on, that if a police officer violates somebody's rights in what he thinks is just doing his job, I'm like, excuse me, morally speaking, your protection under the law disappears when you violate somebody's rights.
That's the John Badell case.
Like I say, that's assuming that our government actually operates under morality, which is fantasy land, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the thing, is that I thought you folks should know that there is one of these major, and I might communicate something to you privately.
Okay.
But I'm not going to say anything openly because I just found out about this myself, and I don't want to put myself in an awkward. You can appreciate.
No,
that.
I understand what you're saying here. But I'm not going to promote them. Yeah. I'm not going to steer people to them because this March for Life thing. Again, it's gun grabber theater. Obviously, somebody has plunked a huge amount of money down to finance all of this. We know some of it came from George Soros and these ride-sharing app companies. I'm sure that the individual drivers didn't all at once say, yeah, we're going to do this. They were probably told, just take them to the March for Life and, you will be paid anyway.
Yeah, well, that's one thing that I saw this YouTube video of a parent who was addressing the school administration. It's like, how did you idiots let my son go to this thing without my approval? If you go to, say you go to a planetarium for a field trip, you got to get the parents' permission to go on a field trip. Well, how did you get my son to go on this thing without asking me? Well, it's like, wait a minute, if my son decided to play hooky, you're claiming that somehow it's okay because he decided to do that on his own. No, if he decided to play hooky, I could get in trouble if I allowed it, if I knew that it was going on and I allowed it. So it's like, what do you people think you're doing by giving these kids a pass to go off on this political rally without getting the parents' permission? That's completely insane. I mean, look, I'm just really upset that you people did this. Not just that you did it, but you did it without asking me. You didn't have me sign a permission form to go on this little political rally. And so, I believe that, I wish I would have been there this last Saturday. There was a rally at every state capitol, and I had this other obligation. I wasn't able to make it. But, there was a rally this last Saturday. I hope that there's going to be more in the future that I'll be able to attend. That basically, and you can appreciate that when I talk about the lawful militia, I'm not talking about a bunch of idiots with guns. I'm talking about people being informed, organized, trained, disciplined, and equipped, and investigating things that the government refuses to investigate, and saying, excuse me, if a cop shoots somebody where that person there was not legitimacy, there needs to be a way of investigating what our government chooses to ignore. That make sense?
It makes sense, but it doesn't happen. Police who kill innocent Americans, and by the way, the police are killing more innocent Americans than the terrorists and the mass shooters are. But it's always the higher up saying, well, it conforms with our department policy. And even the Supreme Court has come on out and said that a policeman can shoot an unarmed American just by saying he was afraid. And basically they're telling us all of our police forces are sissies who are easily frightened, and that gives them the right to use lethal force. Anyway, listen, Mark, I'm going to let you go.
And then they stand idly by when a mass shooting happens. Excuse me? Hey, you got to go. All right. Later, dude.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Quick story. We've got 2 more callers waiting on the line. I'm going to take them in the last segment of our program today. Over at the European Space Agency, they're working on their Mars Express, and it basically orients itself using 6 gyroscopes, 4 of which are now failing. And if they fail, that would end the mission. Well, the folks at ESA came up with a very clever workaround, and they uploaded software that uses the cameras on the Mars Express to look at the star field in order to determine the orientation of the Mars Express. And so it's going to navigate by the stars, and that will allow it to keep on doing its mission even though the gyros have failed. A very, very clever idea, I think. And navigation by the stars is not new with the ESA. They were certainly doing it on Apollo. That's why they had that sextant in the lower equipment bay, because the inertial navigation system wasn't as accurate as they hoped it would be. and it did need constant updates. So let's see. Apparently, Georgia is looking at a computer crime bill that could be used to target independent security researchers. I guess they don't want independent security researchers blowing the whistle on any more NSA backdoors. We're going to take a break for commercials. We're going to come back. We got 2 callers waiting on the line, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today. And remember to stay tuned for John Stadmiller's program. He's got a very interesting guest you're going to want to hear. Let's go back to the phone lines. Dan in Hawaii, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Thank you. Long-time listener. I want to tell you, I think you have one of the best programs on the radio.
Thank you.
And I never miss the program. I had one question. I'm outside of Hilo. What do you think the prognosis is down here in Hilo in terms of a nuclear attack? Should this occur?
Well, if we go to a nuclear war, the obvious first strike targets are going to be the military facilities, which would be here on Oahu. Pearl Harbor, the command post inside the Ko'olau Mountains, Red Hill, the various surviving air bases and so forth and so on. Diamond Head Crater, which is where the emergency command control rooms are located. So it would be very intense here. Now, the only thing you have down there on the Big Island that's really military is there's a military training ground nestled in that valley between Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa, but I can't imagine that's deserving of any kind of a nuclear strike. And even if it was hit, you'd have a nice view of it, but I don't think it would be a problem for you other than the potential for radioactive fallout. But depending upon which way the wind is blowing, you could even get that from Oahu.
Yeah, that's Pohakaloa. All right. Thank you very much, Michael.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. And we're going to switch over to Richard in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you just fine.
Great. I'm just calling. I intend to call more in the future, but I just wanted to point out something. A long time ago, my first wife and I were right outside the architectural building at Kent State University.
Ah.
And very near the National Guard when they shot and killed 4 students and wounded some others, I guess, and at Kent back in those days. And we were there in that time, and we heard that happen. And that began my awareness of what was going on with the world at the time. I was a philosophy student and a psychology student, and I later on went on to some other universities and became a forensic neuropsychologist. But I always remembered that one of the young co-eds that I knew, because I had a job working for housing maintenance and was fixing the drains and the toilets in the dormitory in which Alison Krauss lived. And one of the most beautiful and one of the most loving women I've ever met. We had no relationship, but we were friends. And she was one of the women who were students who was killed on that date and back then. And I've become too aware of the perfidy of the United States and the government and how they kill people wantonly, and they damage all of what we choose to believe in and hold dear. And I just wanted to comment on that. And I'll call in the future when I have something intelligent to say.
Well, this
was
very first person. It was very moving. Thank you very much for the phone call. I'd love to keep you on longer, but there's the music, and it's time for us to leave. Claire and I have to get on out and take care of an urgent errand this afternoon. So stay tuned for John Stadmiller's program. He's got a very interesting guest who's going to be on the show. And take what you learn here, share it with everybody, talk to them, email them, stay off the social media platforms. They're being heavily filtered. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.